Karina Gould is making her official announcement, her official launch to become Liberal leader, and indeed the youngest Prime Minister in the country at the age of 37, were she to win this race. She is speaking French right now. We talked to her in an exclusive interview at the top of the hour about why she's doing this and what she hopes to bring, she says, partly to energize the grassroots of the Liberal Party and to rebuild trust between Canadians and the Liberal Party. Of course, there's lots of news happening today, and in just over 24 hours, Donald Trump will be sworn in as President of the United States, looming over his inauguration, the trade war we've been talking about. Trump has threatened steep tariffs on Canada, but Canada is preparing to fight back with retaliatory tariffs. I spoke with the Minister of Finance, Dominic LeBlanc, earlier. Minister LeBlanc, thanks for making the time.
Good morning, Rosemary.
So Donald Trump sworn in tomorrow on Monday as president. Do you have any sense, indication about what his tariff plan is at this stage?
No more than we would have had last week, Rosemary. We had a number of conversations with some of the incoming cabinet secretaries. I know our ambassador, Kirsten Hillman, was very involved with different senators who would be close to President Trump, Republican senators. But either they don't know or they're not telling us, or President Trump hasn't made those final decisions. So we think we've done a lot of good advocacy work, but we're also now ready to respond, whatever decisions he makes, assuming they come next week. The good news is, particularly after the meeting with the premiers and conversations I and others have had with business leaders across the country, I think we have a sense of how and where Canada can respond, and respond in a pretty fulsome way.
Okay, so let's talk about that. From what we understand, the first round of retaliation that's been identified would be $37 billion. And obviously there has to be some sort of consultation period. So how quickly would you be able to sort of tell people where those counter-tariffs are going and put them in place?
So you're right. The traditional approach is maybe even a 30-day consultative period. I'm told legally we could put some into place, or all of them into place theoretically immediately.
Okay.
But the tradition, as you say, is to get the input of Canadian industry. Some of these are complex supply chains. This is why this isn't a simple or, frankly, a positive undertaking.
No,
it's not something that we want to do. We will do it in response, of course, if the Americans decide to do it. It's not a particularly constructive thing for them to do either. But the initial plan, and I saw some of this reported publicly late last week, and we discussed it with the premiers, would be to have a very short consultation period on a first round of counter measures, if you will, reciprocal or tariffs in response to what they might do. But then it leaves us the opportunity to escalate as well. It leaves us the opportunity to take a bigger bite, to look at other sectors. Our objective is not to learn how to live with potential tariffs. Our objective is to go back to a comprehensive free trade agreement, which we have with the United States. So the idea would be these would be temporary measures to get us, we hope, out from the other side of these tariffs.
You said you met with the premiers last week along with the Prime Minister, and there was kind of an extraordinary show of unity at the end of that meeting, I would say, with the exception, of course, of the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who says that she can't sign on to this approach, given that she thinks oil and gas and an export tax or tariff is on the table. Are you working to try and get her on the same page, or how damaging is that position to Canada's negotiating spot?
It's certainly, as you noted, very positive if all First Ministers and the Government of Canada are saying the same thing.
Sure.
So 12 out of 13 is not a bad, when your university marks, Rosie, if you had 12 out of 13 as a score, it's a pretty good mark. But there's no doubt that the Alberta economy, and in particular the oil and gas sector, is important to Canada. It's important to our national economy. It's very important to the United States. So that's why that conversation is critical. I personally have a very constructive and cordial relationship with Premier Smith. We exchange messages back and forth quite often, text messages or on the phone. So I understand her concern. We have said, and all of the premiers, or many of the premiers, said this in the meeting last week, but there was a clear consensus around the idea that as Canada prepares response scenarios, one sector or one region cannot bear a disproportionate share of the effect. So if it's oil and gas, if it's lobster from Atlantic Canada, if it's automobiles from Ontario. I mean, the response has to be, in as much as is possible, equitable across the country, regions and sectors. The Government of Canada and the provinces will be there, obviously, to support in the eventuality that we get there, these sectors. But at the end of the day, we have said, and we maintain that, Rosemary, everything is on the table. And that is a position that, as I say, 12 out of 13 premiers agreed. But we're not starting with that sort of very severe retaliatory measure. We hope we can get out from under this, whatever this looks like next week, before we get to that point.
Is there a way for you to put export tariffs on oil and gas from Alberta? Because obviously Alberta has had these kind of experiences in its history, and they are very sensitive to Ottawa's involvement in how they manage their own natural resources.
And again, we understand that. However, tariff measures are by definition and retaliatory tariffs, export taxes, pick the instrument, and there's a variety of instruments. It can be export permits, export taxes, retaliatory tariffs. There's a whole series of instruments. They are properly in the hand of the national government. But that's why we had all the premiers in Ottawa last week, precisely because we want to make sure that everybody understands what are potential response scenarios. And everybody, in as much as is possible, rows in the same direction, or pulls, whatever the analogy you want, reads from the same song sheet. I don't want to mix up metaphors. So we're confident that there is a great deal of consensus in the country, but we're sensitive. I'm hoping to go to Calgary when we see what the precise measures the Americans announce. I was in Toronto, Montreal, met all the bank CEOs and other business leaders. But the next important step for me is to talk to that sector. It's critical for the economy. If you come from Atlantic Canada like I do, Rosemary, there are thousands of people, including my cousins and so on, that earn their livelihood in that part of the country and in that sector of our economy. It's pretty important. So we need to do this in the proper way.
Okay, I just want to ask you a couple political questions, if I can, before I let you go. Are you planning on endorsing a candidate for Liberal leadership?
I'll think about that in the coming days. Let's see what the final slate of candidates is. I've talked to a number of my colleagues and a number of the people who've sort of stepped up. Some of them are friends of mine, some I don't know as well as others, but to be honest, I've been really sort of grinding it out, doing my day job. But I recognize it's an important moment for our party, and I want to do the right thing like a whole bunch of Liberals across the country, but I haven't come to a conclusion yet.
Okay, but you're not ruling out endorsing someone, or is that also possible that you just stay out of the mix?
To be honest, I suppose all of these scenarios are possible, but I've got to focus on that in the next week or two. To be honest, Rosemary, I want to talk to the Liberal supporters in my riding in New Brunswick. I want to see where their headspace is too.
Okay, and then finally, my other question, and I'm not sure if you've been asked it yet, but are you planning to run in the next election, or does it depend on who wins the leadership, or what's your thinking on that front?
So I think I was asked that. The New Brunswick newspapers. Yes, I am. The answer, I'm nominated already as a candidate. I look forward to running as a candidate under a new leader and hopefully be part of the next generation of Liberal government. So absolutely, I'm running.
Okay. Nice of you to make the time. Thank you, Minister. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Rosemary. Have a great Sunday.
Donald Trump's repeated tariff threats saw federal and provincial ministers meet with their American counterparts over the past few months to try and make the case for Canada. But now that the president-elect is about to be sworn in, several Canadian officials are headed back to Washington for the inauguration, including Ontario's Minister of Energy, Stephen Lecce. Minister Lecce, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you.
You're heading to Washington for the inauguration. You'll be at the Canadian Embassy with lots of other politicians and diplomats. What are you waiting to see tomorrow when it comes to tariffs?
Well, obviously, we want to get a full understanding of what indeed the president will impose if he should proceed with this action, what the impact will be for Canada's economy and Ontario's economy. We obviously have brought forth an alternative path for the United States because at the end of the day, there's two roads before our U.S. friends. They could either partner with Ontario and Canada to create an unstoppable energy alliance that gives them preferential access to energies and commodity and critical minerals, or they can pursue trade with the world's dictators and enable the Venezuelan and Iranian as well as the Chinese regimes abroad who would love to further finance the export of, in the Iranian case, terror abroad. So this is really existential for Canada and for Ontario. And we want to make the case that it is in their economic interests, in their consumer interests, and certainly in the national security interests of the U.S. to work with us.
So that sort of casts our mind back to the First Minister's meeting where your boss, Premier Ford, was last week, and the idea that people came out of that meeting that everything would be on the table in terms of possible retaliation, with the exception of the Premier from Alberta. And it sounds like you agree with that, obviously, as well, that we have to have all the leverage possible to use against the President.
Yes, I think Premier Ford has made the case that in order to maximize pressure on the U.S., in order to deny President Trump the ability to divide and conquer within the Federation, that we need to be united. Mm-hmm. And we understand fully the importance of safeguarding critical minerals and petroleum and natural gas. We understand the serious concerns of the Premier of Alberta. We too are an energy exporter, particularly with respect to critical minerals and likewise of electricity into the U.S. But look, ultimately, unity will be our strength. And it is the Premier Ford's belief that if we can take one message to the U.S., that it is in their economic interest, that 9 million American jobs depend on this relationship, and that obviously they need a reliable democratic energy partner to help support their growth, that we do believe that this will be much better for the national interest. And obviously we'll wait to see what happens on Monday.
It does sound as though everyone is expecting this to happen at this stage. And I know you and your colleagues have met with a lot of different people to make the case that you're making here. Why do you think Canada hasn't been able to prevent this? I mean, we'll see what happens tomorrow, but no one's very hopeful, I guess, is what I would say, Minister.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's been shifting goalposts by President Trump to be, it's a fair, as Canadians, it started with border security and defense spending. And, the federal government unveiled some additional investments to help safeguard and harden the border to deny the illegal movement of people and drugs and guns from moving back and forth across the border. It then became about the economic imbalance, according to the president. And of course, we have pretty much a trade. The U.S. has a trade surplus when you remove the commodities that they buy from us at a discount. Yeah. So, I mean, the facts are changing. Republicans that we have communicated with, including on the Ways and Means Committee and other important congressional leaders, they understand the value of Canada. They recognize the binary choices before American decision makers between the democratic states and dictatorial states. They understand that we are a solid partner and their number one trading partner. And they also recognize fundamentally that they want to work with Ontario, which is why the Fortress MCAN strategy the Premier unveiled, I do believe, maybe not in the immediate day or two, but it will take hold in the U.S. because they recognize, as sober minds prevail, that they're going to need us. And frankly, we need each other in order to drive that growth.
This is this energy partnership that you and the Premier have been talking about. How quickly do you think retaliatory tariffs need to go in place? If we see something tomorrow, how quickly do you expect Ottawa to act?
I do think they'll act with a sense of speed and strength. I believe there will be progressive actions that can be unveiled over the coming weeks and months, according to the length and impact. But I certainly expect them to respond as they should in the national interest.
Okay, I only have about 30 seconds, Minister, but Premier Ford signaled that he may need a new mandate from voters to take on tariffs. Can we expect an election call this week?
I think the Premier is going to first wait to see what happens with respect to the tariffs on Monday or Tuesday or thereafter, and then make a determination based on the size and scope and the impact to the fiscal framework. Like, if we're talking tens and tens of billions of dollars of stimulus, then the Premier will want to get a mandate. Our government will want a mandate from the people. But at this point, it's a tad premature. I think our focus right now is trying to get in front of the decision makers to make this as short-term as humanly possible, so we can get back on track with a more continental approach to energy, to trade, and to the movement of good ideas between our economies.
Okay. Ontario Energy Minister Stephen Lecce, thank you very much for making the time before you head off.
Thank you.